Wrapping up a little 3-week series. I say little, actually quite a big series on why we celebrate Easter. Why is Easter important in the Christian faith? Why is it like the Super Bowl holiday in church world? And so if you're new tonight, or you're like me and you need a refresher, let's just run back through the last couple weeks before I dive into tonight. So in the first week, we dove into this idea and this reality of the word rebellion, right? So we rolled time all the way back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he created everything perfect. He created everything wonderful. He created everything beautiful. And then he created humankind. He created Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve did what? They rebelled. They chose their own way instead of choosing God's way. And when Adam and Eve rebelled, what happened is God was not surprised by that. He knew that was coming. But as soon as that happened, he then had to put into action a game plan for restoring us or redeeming us from our rebellion. And so in week 1, we looked at that word rebellion and how Adam and Eve rebelled and how it's followed all the way down through the line and lineage of humankind to you and to I today, that's what we do. We rebel. That left to our own accord, our own desires, we will always choose what selfishly pleases us, what we think is best for us, what we want. We'll never choose God. And then last week, some of you got it, some of you didn't. That video that we showed last week, the whole purpose of that video was about redemption. So when we rebel, when we choose our own way, the plan that God had to put into motion was that he had to send a redeemer. There had to be a redeemer to redeem us, to save us from our sinfulness and from our rebellion. And so God sent his only son, Jesus, to live a perfect, sinless life on the earth, and then to be crucified for it, which makes complete sense. He did nothing wrong. He lived a perfect life. He died a perfect life, and he was murdered for it. But in that process, the moment that Jesus died, he was taken off the cross, he was laid in the tomb, and the stone was rolled in front of it. Something began to happen. It wasn't a quick something, it was about a 3-day something. But if you've been around church world long enough, you know that on the 3rd day, Jesus what? He rose. He conquered death once and for all. Like, that's a big deal. Like, I don't know how many funerals you've been to that the person sat up in the coffin. That is my biggest fear. Like, that's always been my biggest fear, side note, is like, when you go to a funeral, that person that looks like they're sleeping, which we know they're dead, but I'm always afraid that it's gonna be like a really sick joke where they're gonna be like, boo, gotcha, ha ha, all right, this thing's over, let's go. Weird side rabbit trail, but I just want you to know where I'm coming from, okay? Cool, totally lost the seriousness of the moment. So, but Jesus beat death once and for all, and in that process, he redeemed us. He redeemed us from our sinful past. He redeemed us from the things that we desire that are not good for us. And tonight, where we're going to end is looking at the word restore or restoration, right? How many of you hear that word and think of like maybe an old car, like restoring an old car? Okay, like three or four of you. So cool. We're going to talk about restoring, rebuilding houses and restoring old cars. So hopefully that'll help. So, but here's the deal. We put so much emphasis on Jesus' life. If you've grown up in church, even if you've come to youth for a long time, or even just a short time, we put such an emphasis on Jesus' life and then his death. And then it's almost like we're just left hanging on the cliff. Like, Jesus died, he rose again, and now what? Like, what's supposed to happen now? And if you've spent any amount of time in church, you know that when we talk about Jesus' death and resurrection, that process is him restoring us, redeeming and restoring us back to the perfection that he originally created creation with. But if you're like me and you're sitting in this chair, you easily go, what is God restoring? Because last time I checked, the world seems more broken than ever. Last time I checked, the world seems like it's going to hell in a handbasket more than it ever has. And if you're anything like me, you got up this morning and you looked in the mirror, and if you were honest with yourself, you looked, and not a like self-deprecating sort of way, but you just looked at the reality of your life and you said, and I'm a broken person. Like, my life has broken pieces to it. There is brokenness in my story. So, John, if what you're telling me is the reason that we celebrate Easter is to celebrate Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection, and the reason we celebrate that is because he's redeeming and he's restoring his creation, then I'm lost, because either I'm the only one missing out or God's not holding up his end of the bargain. And so what I want to teach through tonight and kind of help you navigate through is the reality of what restoration actually looks like. You guys cool with that? Cool, because I'm going to do it anyway. So I didn't really care what you said. We're going to do it, but thank you for the two of you that said yes. So here's I want to look at this through kind of two lenses tonight, okay? There are three parts to this, two of which we're going to focus on because without sounding like a terrible pastor, Jesus has come, he's lived, and he's died. He's been raised from the grave, and his redemptive work and his restoration has already begun. So that's like step one. That's part one. But the two other things that I want to talk about, I want to hammer down, are these two things. Is that God is restoring you personally and individually tonight. Not like God is only restoring Denny because there's something special about Denny, but God is restoring each and every single one of us individually. And the second part in that is, while God is restoring you individually, when you step into that restoration process, that God then begins to equip you to use your gifts, your talents, the things that he's given you and blessed you with, and the places that you go to begin helping restore the rest of creation. So, not that you remember, but let's roll it all the way back to August. When we started youth this year, our whole series was about how you matter, how you have a job in this life. That yes, as students, you play a pivotal role and a pivotal part, and you don't have to wait till you graduate out of middle school into high school, or out of high school into college, or out of college into the real world, or until you get married and have kids, or until you get you don't have to wait for that. That you now, more than ever, can enact change, like a global change. So Jesus has come, he's died on the cross. Yeah, John, you're telling me he's redeeming and he's restoring. I don't see it. So here's how I want to help navigate you through this process, okay? Raise your hand again if you're a car person or your family has car people in them. Like, they can fix cars, especially old cars that like to take apart. And okay, cool. All right. You guys put your hands down. How many of you have family or friends who redo reno houses, or your family has done that, or you've watched Fixer Upper and you've watched Chip and Joanna Gaines, or you at least know who Chip and Joanna Gaines are, and you get the process of ripping apart a house and rebuilding it? Okay, cool. Great. So in those two veins, I'm not a car person, so forgive me. I'm so sorry. I don't want to take away from the car people, but my world is rebuilding houses. That's just what I do, and I do it semi-well. But I'm going to do my best to navigate both of those things. And so in the restoration process, what happens if you're not careful is you begin to focus right here. Right? If you're a car person, you have a car that's really rusted and beat up and torn apart, and you know what you want it to look like, but as you start that process, the daunting challenge becomes a reality. If you've lived in a house reno or remodel, you realize that in order to get ready and to make way for what the vision, the finished product is going to look like, you have to rip out and tear things out. You guys trekking with me so far? Good? Okay. So, the first thing, that God is redeeming and restoring you personally and individually. And here's where I think there's a lot of rub. Not only as students, but even as adults struggle with this. This concept and this idea that, God, if you're redeeming and you're restoring, why is it that everywhere that I look, it just seems helpless and it just seems hopeless? Because you've missed the whole point and the whole process of restoration, right? HGTV and Netflix and all those great fixer-upper shows and things like that have done us a disservice because in 55 and a half minutes, we can watch a house get completely torn apart and rebuilt and it looks beautiful, right? And on some of those car shows, same thing. 55 minutes, you see this car that you're like, that thing is never gonna run and drive. Like there's a hole in like where the person's supposed to sit and that's never gonna work. And then like 57 and a half minutes, they grand reveal the car and you're like, that's not the same car. There's no way that's the same car. We forget that the restoration process is just that. It's a process. That you have to remove the old stuff to make way for the new stuff. The Bible says it this way in 1 Corinthians. It says, 2 Corinthians 5:17. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, and the new life has begun. So if you're trying to restore a car, if you're trying to reno a house, you have to have a vision of where you want that thing to end up. Where do you want that thing to end up? Because if you don't, it's just going to turn into a hot mess. And in that whole process, what happens is the old has to go away to make way for the new. And that's what God is doing. When God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for you, he redeemed you from your sinful ways and your sinful past, and he's now restoring you to the perfect, complete, whole creation that he originally intended all the way back to Adam and Eve to be. But here's what happens. We fall in love and we like the things that God wants to rip apart and take out. We fall in love with the old self. We like the paint job on the car or the house. We like the way those walls look. We like the way that the tires on the car look. We don't want to monkey with that, and we don't want to mess with it. And what happens is, in order to get over here to the final product, the old has to go to make way for the new. And so as God is restoring you individually in that process, it is a long, drawn-out, messy, uncomfortable roller coaster of emotion process. Because what we all want in some way or some degree is we want the finished product. We don't want to go through the long, messy process. We just want to have the final result. We want to be able to get in the car and drive it after it's restored. We want to walk into the house in the grand reveal after all of the old crap has gone and the renovation has been done. We want to walk into that house that's ready to be lived in. And so we end up going, God, how are you restoring? What are you doing? Don't miss it. Just because you don't understand it, just because you don't see it, just because you don't agree with it, doesn't mean that it's not happening and that it's going on. Restoration is a process. It takes time. It takes energy, and it's messy. You got to rip stuff out before you can start putting new stuff back in. And we always forget that because we just want to run to the next thing. We want to run to the end result so that we can enjoy life, so that we can have some sort of perfection because nothing looks good around us. And so we grab for anything that looks good and we run back to the old things that the Lord is trying to rip out so he can make way for the new. And it looks like this because those things begin to intertwine with our identity. Don't take my athletics. Don't take my academics. Don't take my extracurricular activities. Don't take that guy or that girl. Don't take that friend group. Don't take my parents. Don't take my siblings. Like these things begin to intertwine with our identity and we become defined by them and we define ourselves by them. And so that when that renovation process begins to happen, it hurts even more because we can't see the full, complete end result. All we know is we're in the middle of a messy process and it's not fun and it's not happy. And so we stand back and we say, God, how could you be redeeming and restoring? Because everywhere I look, I just see brokenness and I see hurt and I see pain. But here's the cool thing is that when you walk in to the reality of that restoration process, in church world we call it becoming a Christian. When you walk into that process, you are essentially, this is going to go well. You are handing the keys of your life over to God to say, listen, I like driving. I don't like riding. But have your way. Remove whatever you need to remove in my life. Make me the whole, complete, perfect person that you originally intended for me to be all the way back to Adam and Eve before they rebelled. My life is not my own. Here. And when you step into that restorative process, then God begins to redeem you individually. But here's what's cool is it doesn't end there. The last part is God is redeeming you individually, and you're walking through that person, and he begins to gut everything, or what feels like everything in your life. This is what he's doing. You ready for this? He is preparing you to be empowered to change the world. Right? The last thing that Jesus says to his followers is found in Acts chapter 1:8, and it says this, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit," that's God's Spirit, "comes upon you. And you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." After saying this, he was taken up onto a cloud while they were watching, and they could no longer see him. And as they strained to see him rising into heaven, 2 white-robed men suddenly stood among them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why are you standing here staring into heaven? Jesus has been taken from you into heaven, but someday he will return from heaven in the same way that you saw him go." Cool, so Jesus just left us to try to fend for ourselves? No. He left because he wants to empower you to be a part of the change that changes the world. That when you step into that restoration process, and when his Spirit comes upon you, you walk into situations and you do things differently than you would have before. You take the platform that he's given you and you use it and you abuse it for his glory. If you're an athletic person, don't miss an opportunity. If you're an academic person, don't miss an opportunity. If you're an extracurricular person, don't miss an opportunity. If you're, whatever it is. But it means stepping out of your comfort zone into uncomfortable places and doing things that you haven't done before. It means, listen to me, it means getting over yourself and your insecurities and inviting someone to youth. It means showing up to school 10 minutes early and having that conversation about God or about religion that you're terrified to have because you know you don't have all the answers. Guys, guess what? I'm 31 years old. I'm a paid pastor. I don't have all the answers. But I can tell you this. You have built relationships with people in your life, in your circle, and in your world that trust you that I will never be able to reach. You can invite them to church all you want. They've built a relationship with you. They trust you. Don't miss an opportunity. Don't miss a moment where God is saying, listen, all you have to do is say, hey, would you come to youth with me? What's youth? Just this crazy thing that we do on Wednesday night. Would you just come check it out? If you don't like it, that's totally fine. But would you at least come once or twice with me and get a feel for it? The worst they're going to say is no. And the best they're going to say is yes. Why do we celebrate Easter? Why is it such a big deal? Because we rebel every single day of our lives. Every day. We choose our own way. We do our own thing. We want what we want. And even though we rebel, in the midst of our rebellion and the ugliness and the worst of it, God saw you and me And he said, I love them so much that I'm going to send my son to die on a cross to take their place so that they don't have to take that punishment. I'm going to send my son to take it for them because our rebellion helped put Jesus on the cross. Yes, it happened 2,000 years ago, but our rebellion helped put Jesus on the cross. Why do we celebrate Easter? Why is it a big deal? Because in 2 weeks, when I get up on Sunday morning and I go to church, it's not just another Sunday morning. It's a Sunday morning that I have reason to celebrate and be full of happiness and joy because I have a reason to live. Because my Redeemer, the one who redeemed me from my old ways, is alive. He conquered death, defeated it once and for all. And all I have to do is walk into that restorative process, and as he begins restoring me, then he begins to use me to help restore the rest of his creation. I could look at you, some of you, and say, hey, probably not a good idea that you use that kind of language. Probably not a good idea that you post on social media in that outfit. Probably not a good idea that these two fingers are stuck up in the air while you take a picture. Probably not a good idea that you're hanging around those people. Probably not a good idea that you're doing this and that. And all you're going to hear from me is a bunch of rules and regulations. And all your friends are going to hear from me is a bunch of rules and regulations. But if you walk up to your friend and you say, listen, I know how this is going to sound, but I mean this with all the love and grace that I can muster. If you say that, it comes across completely different. When I tell my wife, hey, I know how this is going to sound, I know how this is going to come across, but I love you, and I'm not doing that because I'm trying to hurt her. I'm not doing that because I'm trying to point out weaknesses in her life. Because as I've walked into the restorative process, God is going to use me to help redeem and restore my wife. God is going to use me to help redeem and restore those around me. And that's the same for her as it is to me. That God's going to use her to redeem some sinful places in my life because we have such a close relationship that even when she says things to me that I don't like, that it hurts me, I'm going to take it much better than if Denny walks up to me and calls me and says, bro, what are you doing? I'm going to be like, defense mechanism walls, who the heck do you think you are? Get out of my life. So the question that you're faced with tonight as you go into your tribe groups is, where are you in that process? Where are you in that process? Are you running from it? Are you running from whatever it is that God's trying to do in your life? Are you trying to manipulate it? Are you trying to fix it? Are you trying to be angry at it? Or are you walking into that redemptive and that restorative process saying, God, I have no idea what you're doing in my life, but it is messy, it is uncomfortable, it is frustrating, and it hurts like hell. Like actual hell. But I'm trusting that you're doing something that I don't see, that doesn't make sense to me, for your glory and your good, or to help someone else out around me. So where are you in that process? Let's pray.